We're talking today with Dr. Shelley Earp, Director of UNC's Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center. Certainly he deserves to be interviewed in our survey of good to great at Carolina. Under Shelley's leadership, the Lineberger Cancer Center has taken on great challenges and produced great results. Lineberger has been essential to North Carolina's fight against cancer. 1 in 3 North Carolinians are going to have to deal with cancer in their lifetime. Thousands of cancer patients are treated at UNC Healthcare each year, making UNC the main public advanced cancer center in North Carolina. The Lineberger Cancer Center has helped the medical school recruit over 100 oncology specialists to provide those patients with the best possible care and to teach new generations of physicians. Lineberger has been essential in making UNC a national leader in the attempt to find possible cures for different types of cancer through research. Partly because of this, Lineberger is the largest single recipient of grant funding that UNC has. This fact has led to improved teaching and research all across our campus. It's brought over $1 billion research dollars into the state in the last decade and has implications for the economic development of our whole state, including the development of new companies in the private sector. Its track record in fighting cancer is so good that the legislature in 2007 took the unprecedented step of setting aside $50 million, recurring dollars, to support innovations in research, teaching, and patient care. All of this didn't happen overnight. It's been a story of 25 years of step-by-step progress and adding strength to strength. Shelley, let's go back to the beginning. This is a great story, and I know it's a story of evolution over time, but tell us about the beginnings of cancer research and ultimately and how Lineberger actually did get started.
Okay, well, James, thanks for inviting me to do this, because I think it is a great story about how the faculty of a university can really come together and do something across traditional lines, because that's what the issue is. In a university, we have a departmental structure which probably goes back to the 1200s in England and has served us well in terms of education and many things. But as we get to an area of complex, such as a disease which affects so many people across the state and has social, biologic, and medical aspects, you really have to do things a little different way. And the story really goes back to the early 1970s when Chris Fordham, who was dean of the School of Medicine and then eventually became chancellor, but Chris in his dean's role realized that there were opportunities in the war on cancer, which had been declared by President Nixon in 1972, and that UNC was not fully organized to take advantage of that. And so we actually missed the first round of applications for cancer centers in that 72. But pretty quickly, the dean looked around the faculty and tapped Joe Pagano, who was then really a leading molecular virologist and a physician scientist to bring this effort to the fore. Joe was studying cancer viruses at the time, and he was somebody who Dean Fordham thought could bring the medical side and the basic side together to begin a cancer center. And so in 1975, they put in an application. Joe led that application, and we were designated an NCI conference, NCI Cancer Center.
And I take it that one of the advantages that we had going into that application was the fact that we had not only the medical school, but alongside it a very strong School of Public Health and the hospital. So we had that kind of trifecta of essential resources.
That was very important, because that's one of the things that we talked about in those early applications, and that's only grown. So at that time, I had been to medical school here in the late 60s, and Joe Pagano then tapped me because I was also interested in the basic science of cancer. What makes cells grow? How is that regulated? And Joe was looking for another physician who was also interested. We really didn't have any oncologists at that time. So we didn't have somebody who would have would have designated themselves a medical oncologist. So Joe tapped me, and I became very much involved in the center from an early time. Was involved in their reapplication in 1978, and then have been grown up with Joe's mentorship for over the 35 years
Right.
of the institution.
Now, I understand that President Friday actually was a player here as well in leading you somehow to the Linebergers. Tell us that story.
Yeah, so that's a crucial aspect. We may come back to this, but when you're trying to put together a new entity, an interdisciplinary
Right.
entity, you have to convince people across the spectrum that they're going to get something out of it. And one of the remarkable things at our institution, at every institution, that you need to build something is space.
Right.
And Dean Fordham and Joe Pagano realized that. I was an assistant director at that time, and so Chris authorized a fundraising drive to build a basic research building. The whole institution, UNC at Chapel Hill and the medical school, was very poor in laboratory infrastructure at that time. So Chris saw this
So
as
we're in the late 70s, roughly?
the late 70s. And Chris saw this as an opportunity to actually add to that space
Right.
with an attractive fundraising drive. And that's where Bill Friday came in. Bill also realized that this was crucial to UNC at Chapel Hill, and he knew the Lineberger family from Gastonia,
Right.
where I believe he was from too. And the Lineberger family had a mill in that town and had been very successful financially. Harold Lineberger and I believe his brother Joe were both UNC graduates. So Bill got them with Chris Fordham, and they gave the lead gift, which is crucial in any campaign. And we were able then to raise about half the money to build this building that started the Cancer Center. I suspect that 50% from private fundraising is still the record for any building on the UNC campus.
But that's the beginning of a great public-private
Right.
partnership that continues to the present time. So
Yes.
that's but the essential accomplishment there was the provision of space,
Right.
which allowed you to bring people in to work together.
Yep.
Now, tell me. So that really leads to the next step, which is now you begin to attract, I take it, researchers dedicated to cancer.
And the key thing there at the beginning, again, we're talking about university structures which don't change all that rapidly. I think that's changing now.
That's fair to say.
But the idea of recruiting a number of people, I wouldn't say without regard to department or discipline, because you're going to bring people in from various areas that focus on cancer, but developing those recruitment packages with chairs of both basic and clinical departments required that the interdisciplinary entity, i.e. the Cancer Center at that time, bring something to the table. And space was a terrific coin of the realm, as we say. And so we were able to set out on a series of recruitments with the departments that they were enthusiastic about, because the space wasn't there. We all knew that we needed to bring in a cadre of newly minted people. That was actually the beginning of recombinant DNA.
Wow.
So when the key experiments in recombinant DNA were done in the late 70s and early 80s, some of them done here by Clyde Hutchison and Marshall Edgell, as well as Joe Pagano. But there wasn't any space to bring other people in trained in those areas and in genetics and other things. So we provided that space. The departments provided the faculty slots, and together we brought in some great young faculty.
So were these joint appointments, were these all departments within the School of Medicine?
At that time, yes, they were. It was strictly in the School of Medicine. We evolved in the 80s to do some co-recruitment with the School of Public Health, and we were always trying to bring existing faculty who had
Right.
cancer research into the Cancer Center membership. Early on, there were not many people in the college. That's changed dramatically
yes.
in the last 10 years.
But it strikes me that what you were doing at that point in time was this is not only the beginnings of cancer research and the Lineberger cancer, but this is really, in my view, the beginnings of UNC-Chapel Hill as a major research university. This is because of the model that you've established here of interdisciplinarity and hiring across, first of all, across departmental lines in the School of Medicine, then reaching out to public health, and then into the college, and now pharmacy and all over the place.
Well, it's certainly intertwined. I think the faculty here are spectacular. I just happened to look at a graph that I have seen before of funding, NIH funding, from the 60s to currently, and it's a pretty spectacular story of starting at about $10 to $15 million a year in the 60s, most of which was concentrated in the medical school, and actually most of that in the Department of Medicine and pathology, and to now where we have over $400 million a year from NIH, and it's spread throughout. And that graph is just pretty spectacular with very few blips, just a straight line going up.
And how would you describe, how did you do this? I mean, how did you work? Obviously, as you mentioned, you had space to offer as an incentive, but there has to be more to the story than that. I mean, because you really did achieve an amazing degree of, I think, of cooperation and collaboration in building this strong faculty.
Yeah. In the end, it all comes down to recruiting the right people.
Right.
It's all about people. There are scientists that are absolutely brilliant, and there's nothing you can do to hold them back. They're going to do something fantastic. There are not many of those. Most of us are mortals, and you have to love the scientific inquiry. You have to be willing to work hard. You have to be willing to suffer ignominious defeat to your grants and your papers and get off the floor and fight another day. And in our atmosphere, we really also tried to look for all those qualities of well-trained people, but people that had personalities that allowed them to collaborate.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the formula that Joe started, and that myself and many others have continued at this institution, and it's been a winner.
And I think that's my sense too, that it was that very wise choice of the person, of the human beings, the personality types, that people who wanted to be members of a choir, not just soloists.
Right.
Who have created this culture, which I think is extraordinary.
And there's another aspect to it, because we've virtually always built, with very few exceptions, by bringing in junior people.
Right.
And we brought junior people in from all over the country, the best laboratories, and again with the criteria we've talked about. What could have happened is that we could have taken their careers to a certain level and become a AAA farm team for other people.
Right.
That's where Chapel Hill and the love of the university comes in. Most of these people came from other places,
Right.
but as their careers evolved, and particularly this cohort that we brought in the 80s, who started this, they virtually all stayed. Yeah. And they brought up their kids here, and that would be another time at risk when their kids are gone. Well, maybe they'll go to the big city, and they don't. Yeah. So that group of people have become chairs, have become leaders across the university, and have become extremely well-funded and successful scientists. So,
yeah, it's built, and they're now our leaders.
Right.
But I love that story. Now, I also understand that as this, first of all, we grew as a research entity, and cancer care, clinical delivery was slower to come on. Would you describe that and why it worked that way?
Yeah, no, and that's a true statement. There were a couple of national trends at that time that not all institutions adopted cancer as a treatable disease and as a specialty. You know, when you go, I think we're through this in most places in the nation, but there's still pockets that were widely held in the 60s and 70s, 80s. If you had cancer, you didn't tell anybody about it. It was a kind of a mystery, and you kept it to yourself. I think people knew it wasn't infectious, but it was somehow wrong to have cancer. And in the same way, doctors who didn't know exactly how to deal with cancer that had spread, we didn't have effective therapies, almost took the same attitude. Not they wouldn't talk about it, but they felt, we can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And there was a sense nationally at many, many institutions that building up in this area wasn't the right thing to do. Let's put our money into clinical things we can do something about. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is the sociology of medical specialization.
Right.
In most departments of surgery, for example, were led by general surgeons. And general surgeons were trained to do cancer surgery, and there was a feeling you didn't really need specialists in cancer. And so it really took us till about 1990 to bring in our first surgical oncologist, somebody who'd been trained in one of the few, great large places, Dana-Farber,
right.
Sloan Kettering, MD Anderson. These were the places where cancer was taken care of. We started to recruit from those areas.
In the early 90s?
In the early 90s. We got one head of surgical oncology. He recruited a second person. That second person, Bill Kantz, turned out to be a real star. Chair of surgery now at Roswell Park. But now we have 8 cancer surgeons. And so that grew once it became obvious that expertise helped both patients and the healthcare system. Same thing in medical oncology. The classical hematology was a division in the Department of Medicine that treated not only anemia and things like that, but treated hematologic malignancies. And everyone agreed that, or not everyone, but most people agreed in that era of the 70s and early 80s that chemotherapy was effective in a portion of people with leukemia and lymphoma. But the people that treated that also thought, well, it's not really effective in lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, breast cancer. So again, you had this kind of culture of we don't need that. And that changed in about the late 1980s, and the same with radiation oncology. Right. So the hospital, the medical schools started to invest in those kinds of faculty. And I bet in 1990 we had about 10 people that would have considered themselves oncologists across those specialties. Now we're probably around 110.
Wow.
And that's been the most rapid segment of growth, I think, in the medical school, appropriately so, because so many of our patients have this disease. It's now much more hopeful.
Right.
The interdisciplinary approach is really the way to, and we can talk about that later on.
Actually, I want to talk about that. That's actually the very next thing I want to talk about, because we've already talked about the interdisciplinarity on the research side, but it also happens to a remarkable extent in cancer treatment as well, and it's on the clinical side. So I think that's the next thing to talk about. And do we do that better or differently than other places?
Well, I think we do. And there's always in every problem there's an opportunity.
Right.
So our problem of not having invested in cancer care in the 80s and 90s, in the 70s and 80s, meant that we really didn't have any people with gray hair that were national leaders that wrote textbook chapters.
Right.
A lot of those people who were in that era were kind of the behemoth, the giant that walked the halls, and maybe even thought of themselves as that. And they kind of knew everything and didn't necessarily need to cooperate. So the advantage of not having those people here is that when we started recruiting heavily in the 90s, we were able to attract people with two things in mind: that they really had a scientific orientation towards cancer care, because we knew even then that the genetic revolution was going to give us tremendous opportunities in pharmacology and other things. So we wanted people that and I don't want to say that were just interested in great patient care. Of course we wanted those people, but we wanted our faculty to have a scientific interest too. And we were able to catch the beginning wave of that were being trained. And the second thing is we wanted to recruit people who knew that they needed to cooperate across the surgical, radiation oncology, medical, pathology, radiology lines. And so we started with hospital help, these multidisciplinary clinics. And Wednesday became breast cancer day, and Tuesday became lung cancer day. And those exist to this day, that every week there's a major conference with, in those two particular areas, about 50 people in the room.
Right. Wow.
And they go across all the disciplines, the clinical researchers, the clinical research nurses, the social workers, the psycho-oncology people are all there, so that every new patient that comes in is presented to that conference for a concept and a treatment plan. Now that plan evolves, but everybody's there.
It's a whole team that's looking at individual cases. How unusual or unique is that?
That was very unique in the 1990s. It's actually still unique in the sense that everybody espouses that.
Yeah.
You can't have a cancer care ad for anybody that doesn't say we have multidisciplinary care. The fact is that very few places actually do it in that same way. And there's one of the reasons is it's not cost efficient.
Yeah.
Well, what the heck? I mean, that's not what it's all about.
Right.
It is patient care efficient.
Yeah.
It means that the patient can come and get a number of visits in one day. And our patients come from 200 miles away sometimes.
Right.
And so that ability to see a number of different disciplines be discussed is extremely important. It doesn't, and it gets more complicated than that as time goes on, but we have a structure and an informatics system which makes this work.
It's amazing. But I'd love to hear you talk about that, because I think that really is one of the really outstanding features of Lineberger on the care we give and the science behind that care and the way we bring those people together. Now, so that's a great story of growth, both in terms of depth and reach across the state. Talk a little bit more about that in terms of what that's now made possible that you can do today that you couldn't do 10 or even 5 years ago, in terms of obviously with the recruitment of physicians, much larger patient base, now the ability to do more advanced clinical trials. What does that say about what we are able to offer, especially to the state of North Carolina, that we couldn't have done without this development?
Well, first, it builds on itself. We talked in the beginning, and we probably will talk some more, that in the end, the Cancer Center and the university is built upon the talents of the faculty.
Right.
And everybody here who's doing clinical work is making, at the very most, half of what they would make in private practice. Well, why are they doing that?
Right.
They're doing
why
it.
are they doing it?
They have families. They need to send their kids to college.
Right.
One, they're not poor. Our salaries are reasonable for an academic medical center. Two, they get to live in a spectacular place and raise their families. But three, they're involved in creating knowledge in a way that you can't do every place. And I think you can only do in a few places. I think we're really in the top 10 in that realm. But
but there must be, to your point, there's got to be there's some spiritual compensation of being part of this group.
Oh, there is, because one, you know that you're giving quality care.
Yeah.
And you know that you have the time to think about things and to think about that individual patient, but also how they might fit into a clinical or correlative science research program. We're launching some things that we can talk about later on in cancer genetics that are, I think, really going to be out in front of the nation. And you just can't do that if you're in private practice or even at most institutions. So it's being able to really interact with your colleagues, feel that everybody's on a team about patients, but that you're on a team that's going to do something that's going to change the way practice is.
And is it also true that for many of these researchers, it's an opportunity for them to actually practice what they're working in terms of, you've got people who are both doing research and treating patients?
Really, there is no one, and I don't think there's an exception, who is, quote unquote, only treating patients.
Yeah.
Everyone is involved in clinical or what we call translational correlative science or basic science. We have a number of physicians who are R01 funded laboratory researchers. They're looking at cancer cells, they're looking at cancer models in mice, which we are spectacularly good at, and they are translating that kind of basic knowledge right through with their colleagues into clinical care. And there are many people that don't run laboratories, but are really joined at the hip with people that do. And that's one of the advantages of Chapel Hill, that we have the hospital and the cancer center and the basic sciences and physics and chemistry all within a 2-block area. So we've got physicists that are working on carbon nanotube ways of delivering x-rays, and we've got biologists that are looking at complex systems, biologic approaches to perturbations in cancer. Yeah. And those are talking to physicians every day.
And in fact, when we started this, your first appointments were medicine, then into public health, and you mentioned that now the Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center includes faculty in a number of departments in the College of Arts and Sciences. Talk about that a little bit in terms of the School of Pharmacy, a very close relationship.
Yeah. So those have both been great developments, particularly in the last 7 to 8 years. First, I want to give real credit to Dean Bob Lewin coming into the School of Pharmacy and making the decision that they were really going to be at the top. And I'm sure you've talked to Bob, but I think they've risen from 20th to 2nd.
That's right.
In NIH funding. And they provided a faculty that's interested in applied research. I think a number of faculty are moving that way, but there are areas in which cell biologists and biochemists and cancer geneticists are trained in the fundamental research. Pharmaceutical sciences, medicinal chemistry, chemical biology really are melding with that now, but it's a different area. Yeah. And Bob provided the wherewithal to bring faculty, and we have co-recruited with him in multiple different areas. The same is true in chemistry and physics. There are a couple of spectacular people, Joe DeSimone, Odo Joe, who are national leaders in their own fundamental areas of material science and chemistry and physics. They've turned their attention to applied research in the sense that the very fundamental discoveries in the carbon nanotubes and nanotechnology that can both develop devices or delivery systems. And Odo Joe in physics is now, some of his major collaborators are in the Department of Radiation Oncology.
Right.
And they're developing not only new ways of imaging. Odo is developing a new form of breast tomography, which we believe will supersede ordinary mammography at some point in time, with more accuracy and less radiation. That's in development, and it's all the way from soup to nuts, from very fundamental physics to the clinic. Joe DeSimone is working with surgeons and physicians and biologists on how you deliver nanoparticles, and so that's been a tremendous boost to bringing everybody together. But it doesn't stop there. The Department of Psychology has been very good. We've given some Lineberger small grants. That's one of the carrots we have. Our private fundraising has allowed us to have a pilot project program that feeds what we call clinical translational research, or the public health population sciences. And there have been some senior people in the Department of Psychology that have gotten some of those grants and have turned them into large $1 million NIH grants.
That's great.
Studying couples.
Yeah.
And how they deal with decision making in breast cancer therapy or in prostate cancer therapy. So it really does involve everybody. We just had our first joint hire with the School of Journalism.
Really?
A health communications expert who's interested in media.
Yeah.
A young guy, actually an associate professor that's joining, and so it's our first joint hire with journalism.
You mentioned, I want to go back to this issue of translational medicine and bench to bedside. I think there's a particularly good story about prostate cancer in eastern North Carolina and how we're dealing with that. Talk about that a little bit.
So one of the great collaborations has been with the School of Public Health, as you've mentioned. I think about 40 of our faculty of Lineberger members are based in the School of Public Health, in the behavioral sciences and epidemiology and biostatistics and nutrition, all of those areas. There's a couple of very major, and I think nationally important, population-based studies that have come out of that. They've revolved around something you would call molecular epidemiology. One's in breast, and really, again, across the eastern part of the state.
Right.
Now the phase 3 extends all the way from the east to Charlotte. And the other one is in eastern North Carolina, east of Raleigh, in prostate cancer. The tenet there is that if you study prostate cancer in your hospital, you can gain knowledge, but it is biased by the people that come to your hospital. And that if you really want to do research that is generalizable to the population, that you need to go to the population. Well, that's hard. If somebody walks in your door at the hospital, you can grab them and consent them and say, gee, would you be involved in this? And they will or they won't. But if you want to do a population-based, you have to do something that we started in the 90s, under Barbara Hulka and Beth Newman at that time in epidemiology. Michael O'Malley really helped with this. We went to the state tumor registry, and we created what we called the rapid case ascertainment. So in our state, everyone who has cancer gets reported when their pathology report comes to their hospital. So there are 46,000 cases each year. They all flow into the state tumor registry, but they do so at different rates. Smaller hospitals are slow to report. And we created a core facility of the cancer center in Raleigh at the state tumor registry, hiring 2 or 3 people who, in the areas that we needed, breast and then prostate cancer, actually sped those reports coming in, so we would know within 2 to 3 weeks of a diagnosis of who got breast cancer in 24 counties or who got prostate cancer in 30 counties. And it required circuit riding to the small hospitals and talking to the tumor registrar. So that infrastructure led UNC to be able to do these kind of things. And we've done 2 major studies, Carolina breast cancer study, about 2,000 women, half black, half white, and the reasons for that we'll talk about in a second. And the same thing in the prostate cancer.
Right.
And we get biologic samples from the pathologist. We visit the homes of these people.
Right.
After we get consent. We do a questionnaire about the kinds of things that might have led to cancer. We're starting to do questionnaires about how you got detected and how you're treated. So this gives us a population. And we've been particularly cognizant of there are unfortunate differences in outcomes between African Americans and whites in this state and virtually every state. But we've made some groundbreaking observations. Most, we believe, of the disparities in death have to do with unequal socioeconomic status and the problems that leads to in accessing health care, screening, and other things. But we've actually made some observations that are literally groundbreaking. In breast cancer, we have experts in molecular genetics who have subdivided breast cancer not as one disease, but as 5 diseases.
Right.
And using this population-based study, we were able to look and find that one of those subtypes was twice as frequent in younger African American women than any other subset. And that was startling at first. And we checked it and checked it, and but that has been confirmed now everywhere in the world, including Africa. So there's something about younger African American women that predisposes them to a particular type of breast cancer. It's somewhat more aggressive. It's harder to treat in some ways. In other ways, I think we're getting a handle on it. But its incidence, so it has nothing to do with health services or early detection. And that has spawned a huge number of grants, including a big PO1 that we just got from NCI to continue to study this. And so that's one of the real highlights of UNC Lineberger research over the last 2 decades. People all over the world know of that observation. On the other hand, there are many other aspects of disparities that we believe are due to health services. The prostate cancer study is now being used by Paul Godley and Ron Chen, 2 prostate cancer researchers with both epidemiology and health services backgrounds. And they've just recently pulled down a $3 million grant from AHRQ to look at that data set and try to understand what were the components of delay in seeking care or lack of health care delivery that's creating this disparity. So those projects are, they're difficult to do, they're expensive, but they are extraordinary. The Carolina breast cancer study, which started in '93, there have now been 85 papers published from that study.
And I would just want to point out, I think you'll agree that probably couldn't have done that without a strong School of Public Health on the one and a population center, great social science researchers who do these kind of population studies.
That's right. And that's the expert, and the methodologists and the biostatisticians. So it really is an extraordinary team result.
I want to now turn to what's the very recent past, and we've had some spectacular success in this state with support from the public sector, from the state legislature itself, with both the construction of the new North Carolina Cancer Center, the hospital, and the establishment of the Cancer Fund. How did all of this come about? I mean, this didn't just happen. How did we generate such generous and sustaining support for what we're doing here from the state itself?
Well, I think there are a number of aspects to that came together all at once. One, I think that the public nature of the cancer program here and the mission of UNC hospitals to serve people regardless of their ability to pay has had good consequences. The developing of that expertise that we talked about, these
right.
multidisciplinary clinics, meant that people who couldn't pay and who couldn't get the kind of care from anywhere in the state can come here and get it. But also it drew a number of legislators
right.
And their families. And so when the cancer hospital was funded, for example, there are 50 state legislators. I mean, there are 50 senators.
50 senators.
5 of those senators had had spouses
right.
who were treated in our cancer program. We didn't set out to do it that way, it just happened.
Right.
So the combination of quality and service to the state, I think, set the stage for this. We have a fantastic board of visitors for the
right.
Cancer Center. And
how important were they in getting legislative support?
They're extremely important. They actually started, they became active in the mid-1980s, and their first task of helping to educate the legislature
right.
was really around the 1994 Dick Spangler bond issue.
Mm-hmm.
And the extension of the Cancer Center itself was funded through that bond issue, and our Board of Visitors then was very active on behalf of the whole university
right.
in getting that funded. They participated in the great bond issue that you were involved in. So there are a group of people that are passionate about
right.
the Cancer Center and its mission, and they're from all over the state. So they've been very helpful in helping to educate the legislatures. But then the reality is that if you look across the country, these kinds of state supports don't arise without a major champion. And Senator Mark Basnight was the major champion in this case. He had experience and saw patients being treated in our 1952 tuberculosis sanitarium,
right.
the
right.
Gravely building that had been renovated 7 times, and decided that we had all this wonderful talent and patients deserved a better situation. Had a great day in the legislature when the cancer hospital was passed. It took 3 years to get it passed, but during the last year when times were a little bit better financially, Senator Jeannie Hopkins Lucas stood up on the Senate floor and revealed for the first time to her colleagues that she had breast cancer, and that her doctors were in the audience, and that she thought that the people that took care of her were the best in the nation, and that the patients were well cared for, but the place that they were being cared for wasn't cutting the mustard.
It was.
And we got a vote, I think, of 49-1 that day after that speech, passing the cancer hospital. But again, that was at the end of 3 years of education.
We're coming to the end of our time, Shelley, but I want to. My last question is this: did you have a roadmap? How much how much of this was strategic, long-term vision? How much of it was opportunistic and serendipitous?
I was totally laid out. No, I think that we've kind of discussed the general roadmap. I mean, you have to take advantage of the opportunities that you have at the moment. Building a building created an entity, the Lineberger Cancer Center, and gave us an opportunity to bring in basic researchers, and so we did that. The School of Public Health was really the next big thrust. And we had great leadership there who wanted to do this. And then as the medical school and the hospital saw the need for the clinical program, we were able to be there for that. In each area, this is a 35-year history. People do ask, how to, what did you and the faculty do to build this? And well, it took 35 years. It didn't happen overnight. But the idea was that in each of these areas, yes, you get together and you have some strategic directions that you want to do. We knew that recombinant DNA was going to be important. We knew the cancer genetics, and you very much participated in that by helping to build the whole genetics infrastructure here. And then you go after those people. But it's always about opportunities. It's always about finding the best people. So I think we've probably gotten more strategic with the funding of the Cancer Fund, for example.
That's very strategic, isn't it?
We laid out a model where there are 3 things we're going to try to be national leaders in: cancer genetics, optimizing North Carolina cancer outcomes, the kinds of things that we talked about in the state, improving quality of care in the state, understanding cost effectiveness, and then drug development. We're really going after making new drugs to treat very specific cancers.
And you've been very concrete about that, and very accountable, because obviously we want to keep that funding strong and continuing. And so I salute the way you're being really solicitous of staying on the plan with that fund. Well, I think we're out of time, but I want to have the last word here, and that is to say, Shelley, I think this is one of the best good to great stories we have at Carolina, but it all comes down, in my view, to a quality of leadership that you have brought. And I've said to other people, and I want to say publicly here, that it's your own spirit of selflessness, the lack of an ego, the celebration of other people's success and brilliance that has put all this together and made this really one of the great stories of this university. And I want to thank you for what you've done.
Thank you, James.